Yeah, I'm a co-founder of Things. I made Vox Populi together with another person, and I'm trying to start something similar. Who has heard of Vox Populi? Awesome, cool. Tell the ones who haven't. I'm trying to start something similar for JavaScript. I'm self-employed. I do infrastructure and open source. I'm on social media. You can find me. And I'm queer, which is kind of important, or not. I think it's important to point it out because I've been given a platform, and it means I'm able to represent at least a little bit of our community. So I'm using this opportunity to say things like, yay, I'm queer, and I'm depressed, and I'm bisexual, and none of this really matters. But this talk is about me, so. My first language is also like Serbo-Croatian, and this is from an email exchange about the DevOpsDays talk. I was missing my ch in the name. Yeah, I speak a lot of other languages. Also, like C, for instance. So I'm a classically trained Unix systems administrator, which means I started out programming, or at least learning programming with C, and then like C++ and Java, and IBM 360 assembler, and PIC, and PL1. Who has done PL1? Yay, I'm alone. Yeah, that's pretty much the reason why I stopped programming. So the thing is, like, looking at this, you could basically think, I mean, that sounds like a lot of programming. Are you sure you're not a programmer? And if it hadn't taken me 15 years to come to that conclusion, we wouldn't be sitting here, so enjoy. Okay, so a couple of tools that I picked out along the way in my career, and how they kind of like benefited me in, yeah, both my ops job and now later in my development job. I learned how to build a distro, which is kind of useful, from Linux from scratch, which taught me how the Unix runtime environment works and how to build software, especially on Salaries, which is hard, and how to debug it with strays. I learned how to install software. There's a beautiful piece by Dave Barry. It's called How to Install Software, and you should all read it. It's very accurate. Yeah, I learned that debugging is really hard at 3 a.m. in the morning when you have like only VI and no syntax highlighting, which taught me a lot about risk assessment. And from that, I learned like basically the biggest tool of operations, which is, oh dear, it's gone, never mind. I should know my order a little better. The most important tool in operations is basically like saying no to everyone. So that was very important. And reading any programming language. Yeah, I've supported a lot of my life through keeping Java applications running. I've never written Java myself, but I've read a lot of Java stack traces. Yeah, so automation is amazing, and I did a lot of that in Perl, Bash, and Ruby, and I did it in Make before I knew Puppet, because Make is idempotent, which is important. Yeah, I learned how to read and comprehend documentation, mostly by writing documentation for open source projects, like Apache HTTPD and Traffic Server. And yeah, I learned from Rich Bowen from Apache HTTPD how to be patient while supporting people who are just giving you the most minimum of obscure information possible to debug their problem. Yeah, I learned design and architecture, whatever that means. I picked it up along the way, and I built and debugged distributed systems before they were cool, and before we called them distributed systems, because like actually everything is distributed. Like do you know anybody who's running just everything on one thing? I was on call for like 2 years, badly paid. I think I became more of an alcoholic through that. I stopped since, both on call and like drinking. But yeah, I'm also very happy about the recent trend in ops that people are now like drinking tea and enjoying life instead of killing their liver. Yeah, I think risk assessment, that's the ops hammer. Okay, so how I became a developer. This is a beautiful tweet by Donny Burkholz, who called out Puppet specifically because they're saying developing things instead of scripting. And like I've done a lot of that. I've written since I learned Puppet and since I had to use it. I've written like thousands of lines of Ruby and Puppet code. But the thing is, like in my mind, there was always infrastructure, and infrastructure code is invisible. It doesn't make anyone money, so it doesn't count. And in my mind, all those thousands of lines of C++ code that I wrote or deleted for Apache Traffic Server while doing release management didn't count either, because that was just open source and nobody paid me to do that. So how did I become a developer? I was culture unfit. The team I was working on hired a new person who was full-time, and he had a working style that nobody really could work with. So I told my boss, I'm like, you know, I'm not sure I want to come back next quarter. In fact, I don't know if I want to come back next month. I was like, yeah, how about you just go to a different team? Yeah, he put me on his team, developing a infrastructure provisioning application in Go, which is not Terraform. And that's how I became a developer. That's pretty much it, because it was official. And I had to accept that. So, what did I bring? Here's some ops tools. This is 2015, 2 years ago. I think this is still true. Somebody asked me to back this up, and I wrote a little blog post. And here's like the main pillars. How do you automate software properly? What do you need? So you want a good known configuration format or tooling. You want packages. You want to use system facilities of some sorts. You don't want to reinvent every wheel. You want that documented. And if it fails, you want like useful error messages and log messages. So why packages? Why packages are super useful. They provide atomicity and version numbers that can be trusted. If you put them in some kind of repository, they're discoverable. And there's a great link here. If you accidentally write your own package manager, this what to do. Don't panic. Services, like most software that's running for a while, might need some facilities, and most operating systems already provide them, like log rotation, batch jobs, and scheduling, and like a watchdog. So who here has worked on projects that have reinvented any or all of these? Was it necessary? Just a hint, you know. So configuration formats, like known good. Does anyone know a good configuration format? Or else you have like a configuration tool that's hopefully idempotent. So I told you I wrote this 2 years ago. I've since learned a lot. Okay, so who has worked in a company or in a project where you have invented your own configuration format or your own programming language? Accidentally? Yeah. So I only noticed this like the other day. I was like, hey, we're basically making a programming language that's like, and a configuration language, and they don't really, this is like Greenspan's 10th rule. Like, what are we doing? Why are we doing that? Yeah. So you cannot do that. There's a choice. So what did I bring to development? Some kind of experience, and I thought like, you know, I could start advocating for all the things that I thought were missing now that I'm in this team. Like, you know, UX in this CLI tool that we're building, and maybe like documentation, or you know, you could just have UX in general. It's like just have, yeah. Or if you're building some kind of web service, you wouldn't want to be woken up at night. So now you're on the other side and you're like, hey, let's build some resilience into that. Or, as I already mentioned with the configuration thing, you could be like, hey, this thing that we're planning out in our agile process could just be replaced with a package that's installed and like 2 lines of configuration. How about we do just that? And another thing is, like, regardless of how well you know a programming system, as like with a rich operations background, you've probably seen like 1 million pieces of moving software and you've debugged them all. So you're fairly familiar with doing that, and you can do that before it hits production, which is kind of neat. The other thing that I brought to the table was like the lack of experience, and I was like, hey, let's start documenting things, or instead of trying to document why this code is so awful, could we just like make it simpler? And I introduced things like the support person of the day. So we're developing this provisioning software, which is used by admins mostly, right? And yeah, like when it misbehaves, you can like just ask a developer. And so we made that official and have a rotation in place where each of us developers is doing admin of the day sort of thing. And now we're doing that with new members in the team with like backup so that they get some kind of onboarding in being nice to people who are using their awful software. Okay, so what to leave behind? I kind of mentioned that already, like this big no hammer of operations, and our favorite process of everything is really, really slow, which was sort of like a evolutionary development, right? Like Agile sprung up, and then on the other side, Ops was like, no. So you could consider like leaving that behind in some cases. Okay, the main reason why operations folks are afraid and always say no is because new things break. And I'm here to dispel all your fears. There are no new ideas. So this is Rust, or the Rust logo. And the Rust programming language is like 7 years old now. But like all the ideas in Rust are like 20, 30, 50 years old. So I don't think we've had any good ideas in the past couple of decades. Chris, you look very suspicious. So, I'm not going to talk about imposter syndrome. There are more qualified people who are feeling more inadequate and are talking about that much more competently than I could possibly hope for. The fact is, I'm a really bad programmer. And that's okay. Like, you can still write Go code if you're a bad programmer, because it's like everybody can apparently write Go code. It's a very simple language, but we can make it even simpler. That's what I've been kind of advocating in my team. It's like, hey, let's this is unreadable. There's like too many ifs here. Let's just move that over to the left so it fits on my screen and I can read it. And this brings me to like what I've been missing in development. There's this beautiful classic thing that you've now seen for like 5 minutes. How to learn programming. And what I've been missing is like how do you go from step 1 to step 2? And I couldn't figure it out. And the thing is, it's actually very simple. You just repeat step 1 forever. So what I've been missing in like trying to learn programming is this kind of manual, like the FreeBSD manual of programming, or the Linux from scratch book of programming. Because the FreeBSD manual just tells you everything about how to administrate a single system from beginning to start, like setup to network. And the Linux from scratch manual is basically like, it takes you from an empty VM to a sort of functioning Linux distribution. And it does that by relentless repetition, because you have to do it in multiple stages. And at every stage, you either have a working thing, or you have to debug it with only the tools and the knowledge that you have built, literally built so far. Or you have to start over again. And so I've found a couple of books lately that sort of qualify for that. And one of them is Eloquent JavaScript and How to Design Programs, the second edition. Like the first is kind of shaky. But the thing is, like, if you're new to programming or you want to break in, don't hesitate to like read these for kids books, because they're really well written and really good. So, one of the things I've been missing, sort of like, sometimes you have to just like bite the bullet and learn a new thing, but oftentimes you can really get away with using parallels to things that you already know. And so one of the things that I've been missing is shells, until I discovered Pry. With Pry, you can just like CD and ls through Ruby code, and you can show source to actually look at things. And Pry was an absolute revelation to me, because it made a programming system much, much more discoverable. And since I discovered Pry, I wanted every programming system to have something like that. But what actually happened was that I would gravitate towards programming systems that had that. So there are some here that have something like Pry. Like Jupyter is amazing. Clojure is like Clojure. That's already the REPL. And Erlang and Elixir have also amazing read, eval, print loops. Work really well to discover the entire system. So apparently, and obviously I was lying, there's nothing missing. You have really good systems and parallels and books and resources that are available, many of them for free, that you can use to make programming accessible to yourself. And I want to call out these two books for when you get really, really, really deep and then are stuck. That's Ruby under a microscope, on Erlang in anger, and I think that should be always caps, but it's not. So, what's missing? Thank you. Money. Operations folks usually make less money than developers for some reason. So if you moved to programming recently and you're feeling confident now to call yourself a programmer, you might want to consider renegotiating your salary. Thinking about it, maybe your ops colleagues who are still stuck in ops might want to renegotiate their salaries as well, because I mean they're like really brilliant integration specialists, and there's like no need to pay them less just because they have a different title. And that's all, folks. And we have around 4 minutes now for questions, comments, and anecdotes from you about your journey in either direction and fears, if this is possible.
Yes.
Yes.
Microphone if anyone has a question. Or not.
Maybe I shouldn't have said the word fears.
Any questions?
Well, in that case, we can just like